During my 75th birthday party, I heard my daughter-in-law whisper to my son, "I hope this is his last birthday." I was just a few feet away. They pretended I hadn't heard anything. But someone did, and 5 minutes later, that person grabbed the microphone. That's when everyone found out who I really am. Before we go any further, help us grow by subscribing to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Howard McAllister. I'm 75 years old, and I live in Princeton, New Jersey. To people who see me on the street, I'm just a regular retiree who tends a garden and spends afternoons reading old books in the backyard. Most people believe I worked in the public sector my whole life, and I let them think that. I live simply, modest house, old car, no-name clothes. That's enough for me. You probably know what it's like when people try to put you in a box, right? That's the price of being an underestimated senior in a society that judges by appearances. I've always valued silence more than showing off. While others go out of their way to flaunt what they have, I'd rather keep things low-key. My routine revolves around things that connect me to the past. Working in my workshop, building miniature ships, organizing old technical documents, studying naval engineering as a hobby. I believe character is measured by actions, not appearances. But does everyone see things that way? Sometimes I wonder if my quiet nature sends the wrong message. It's strange how the modern world mistakes humility for weakness. Of all the people in my life, Chloe understands me the most. She's 19, studies history at Princeton University, and spends weekends with me. While other young people are focused on social media, she'd rather sit in the garden and talk about books or past events. Our bond has always been special. She really listens to me. With Chloe, I can just be the grandpa who tells old stories. It's rare to find someone who accepts you exactly as you are, without trying to shape you into something else. My son Travis married Melissa 15 years ago. She's a luxury real estate agent in Princeton and clearly obsessed with social status and appearances. I always sensed she saw me as out of place in the life she built with my son. Visits became tense, and her comments about my simplicity more frequent. Travis rarely defends me in these moments. He just changes the subject or pretends he didn't hear. It's like he's afraid to disagree with her about anything, even when it involves his own father. When they suggested throwing a party for my 75th birthday, my first reaction was to say no. I'm not into big celebrations or elaborate social events, but Chloe insisted, saying it would be a chance to bring close family and friends together. I ended up agreeing, thinking it'd be something intimate and casual. Little did I know Melissa had completely different plans for the celebration, and that a few seemingly simple decisions can change absolutely everything in our lives. Sometimes, accepting an invitation can be the beginning of an unexpected revelation. Melissa took full control of the party planning. She picked the most expensive venue she could find, the Ellington Conservatory, a historic mansion in the heart of Princeton. When I asked about the budget, she laughed and said it was to impress the right people. I was completely excluded from every decision. I tried to suggest a simpler place, but all I got was, "You just need to show up looking presentable, Howard." That was the first time I felt like my own party didn't belong to me. Have you ever been treated like a guest at your own celebration? I was left out of every important decision in the days that followed. When I asked about the details, Melissa would reply in a condescending tone that I didn't need to worry about those things. Travis backed her up, saying it was better to let Melissa handle it, because she knows about social events. With each conversation, it became clearer that they saw me as an obstacle to their plans. It's amazing how an arrogant daughter-in-law can turn a celebration into a power play. What's worse is realizing your own son silently agrees with that dynamic. The micro-humiliations started showing up in what seemed like innocent details. Melissa would talk on the phone with her friends, always loud enough for me to hear, saying things like, "I hope Howard doesn't show up in that jacket from 1980. Or, "I'll have to coach him on how to behave around important people." Travis never stepped in during those comments. In fact, he would even smile, as if they were harmless jokes. It's funny how disrespect disguised as concern can hurt more than a direct insult. Every comment felt like a small stab to my dignity. Chloe started picking up on the tense atmosphere, but stayed quiet during those moments. I could see her watching everything closely, especially when Melissa made sarcastic remarks about my looks or personality. One time I heard my daughter-in-law tell a friend, At least he won't talk much at the party. You know how quiet he is." The tone made it clear that my reserved nature was a social flaw to be managed. Travis was there and didn't say a single word. Sometimes, the silence of someone who should defend us hurts more than the words of someone who attacks. The final straw in the planning process was when Melissa organized a preview of the event with a few close friends to test the menu. I wasn't invited to this gathering, at my own house. I found out when I came back from the pharmacy and saw strangers in my backyard judging decorations. "We thought it'd be better if you didn't participate so it wouldn't influence anyone's opinion," Travis explained, as if my presence would somehow ruin their judgment. Melissa added, "It's just to make sure everything turns out perfect for your big day." That's when I realized the party was never really about me. It was about the image they wanted to project. The night of the party arrived, and I felt like a stranger at my own birthday. I was placed at a table far from the main organizers, away from the spotlight. Only Chloe chose to sit with me, while Travis and Melissa ran the show from a table near the stage. Guests made polite formal toasts, but I realized most of them barely knew me. Melissa faked enthusiasm when needed, but avoided any meaningful interaction with me. It was strange to be the center of a party where you feel completely invisible. You know that feeling of being surrounded by people and still feeling alone? The speeches began, and each person spoke about celebrating life in a generic, hollow way. Melissa gave an eloquent toast about family and traditions, earning warm applause from the guests. Travis followed up with words about legacy and values passed down through generations, but his speech sounded robotic. I just smiled and nodded when expected, playing the part of the polite birthday man. Chloe kept watching me closely, as if gauging my reaction to it all. The setting was elegant, the food excellent, but something essential was missing from that picture-perfect family story. The string quartet's music faded between pieces, creating a moment of silence in the hall. That was exactly when I heard Travis and Melissa talking quietly at the table next to us. They clearly thought the room was still loud enough to keep the conversation private. Travis was saying something about the success of the event, when Melissa casually laughed and responded without a hint of concern. Chloe was right beside me, also unintentionally hearing the conversation. What my daughter-in-law said next hit both of us like a punch. "I hope it's his last birthday." The sentence cut through the air with terrifying ease, like a casual comment about the weather. Travis clearly heard it and didn't react. He just kept poking at his food. I felt my heart race and a cold wave rush down my spine. Chloe immediately looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and outrage. For a few seconds, we both froze, trying to process what had just happened. She squeezed my hand under the table, as if trying to give me strength. This was how my daughter-in-law truly felt about my existence. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Chloe whispered, clearly shaken by what we'd just heard together. I tried to smile and nod, but she knew my face too well to buy the lie. 75 years of life, decades quietly supporting my family financially, and this was the gratitude I got. The worst part wasn't even the cruelty of the words themselves, but the total indifference from my own son. Travis just swallowed hard and kept eating, as if nothing had happened at the table next to him. It was as if his father's death would be nothing more than an administrative inconvenience. "I need some air," I murmured to Chloe, getting up quietly from the table. I walked out to the conservatory's garden, desperately needing silence to process what had just happened. My mind was in total chaos after discovering how my family truly felt about me. The celebration lights glowed through the glass windows, but I felt completely disconnected from it all. It was surreal to be running from my own party because of a sentence so cruel, yet so revealing. I stood there, trying to gather my thoughts and decide what to do with this devastating information. Chloe followed me into the garden a few minutes later, clearly worried about my emotional state. "Grandpa, I heard everything," she said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "This can't just slide." I looked at her and saw a determination in her face I'd never seen before. She went back into the hall while I stayed outside, trying to make sense of how my family had reached this level of cruelty. I never imagined I'd learn the truth about how they felt about me in such a brutal and public way. But Chloe had other plans. Chloe walked back into the hall with a determination I'd never seen in her before. I watched through the garden window as she made her way to the area where the DJ was managing the event's sound. She seemed to have a very clear plan in mind, but I couldn't imagine what a 19-year-old could do in a situation like that. The music had returned to its usual volume, and conversations were flowing as if nothing had happened. Travis and Melissa were still at their table, probably thinking their cruel conversation had gone unnoticed. But some words, once spoken, can't be taken back. She spoke briefly with the DJ, who initially hesitated to hand the mic over to an unfamiliar young woman. I saw Chloe explain something with firm gestures, pointing to me in the garden and then to the table where Travis was sitting. The man looked in my direction, seemed to realize she was my granddaughter, and finally agreed to her request. In that moment, I realized my granddaughter wasn't going to let this go. She had heard the same cruelty I did, and she was determined to do something about it. A moral reckoning was being prepared right there, in front of all the guests. Melissa had gotten up to greet a few guests near the buffet, clearly enjoying the praise for organizing the event. She accepted compliments about the party as if she were the true star of the evening, smiling gracefully at acquaintances. Travis remained seated fiddling with his phone, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Neither of them had the slightest idea their words had been heard by both of us, let alone that someone was planning a public response to them. Arrogance often blinds people to the consequences of their own actions. Chloe returned to the table where she had left her bag and discreetly pulled out her phone, typing something quickly. From the movement of her fingers, it looked like she was sending messages or doing some kind of specific online search. She glanced toward me through the window and gave a subtle nod, as if to reassure me. I remained in the garden, torn between curiosity about her plan and anxiety over what might happen. Was she going to confront Melissa directly, or Travis? The truth is, I had no idea what my granddaughter was capable of when truly outraged. The clock in the hall showed almost 10 o'clock when I saw Chloe approach the DJ again. This time the conversation was brief, and he immediately agreed to her request. A few waiters received instructions from her to hold off on serving dessert, creating a small strategic pause. Melissa was too busy soaking in compliments to notice the quiet maneuvers around the hall. Travis was still glued to his phone, completely unaware of anything happening nearby. My granddaughter was orchestrating something with impressive precision for someone so young. The music gradually faded out until it stopped completely, creating a silence that drew everyone's attention in the room. Chloe stood near the microphone, upright and confident in a way that contrasted with her young age. Guests began looking in her direction, curious about what was happening outside the official program. Melissa noticed the movement and frowned, clearly confused about why her niece was interrupting the event. Travis finally lifted his eyes from the phone and looked toward the small improvised stage. Neither of them had the slightest clue about the storm that was about to hit their reputations. "Sorry for the interruption," Chloe began, her voice clear and steady through the microphone, making the entire hall fall completely silent. "But I need to tell you who the man we're supposedly celebrating tonight really is." Her tone was respectful yet firm, and every word hit like a perfectly aimed hammer. Some guests whispered to each other. Others pulled out their phones to record the unexpected moment. Melissa tried to smile as if it were all part of the planned program, but I could see her discomfort growing. Travis froze completely in his seat, as if sensing something was terribly wrong. Chloe looked directly at me through the garden window, as if silently asking for permission to continue. I gave a small nod, still not fully believing what I was witnessing. 75 years of life, and I had never had someone stand up for me so boldly. The truth was about to come out in a way neither I nor Melissa could have ever imagined. And it all began with a 19-year-old who refused to accept cruelty as something normal. The silence in the hall was deafening as everyone waited for her next words. Melissa tried to approach the stage, probably intending to stop whatever Chloe was about to say publicly. But my granddaughter had already taken full control of the situation, and there was no turning back. The guests were completely focused on her, waiting for the rest of a speech that clearly wasn't part of the official schedule. Travis made a move to get up from his chair, but seemed to realize that any action would only draw more attention. The moral revenge I would never have had the courage to carry out was being delivered by someone who truly loved me. And I was still in the garden, watching everything unfold through a window, completely stunned. My grandfather, Howard McAllister, is the real reason this event even exists. Chloe continued with unwavering firmness into the microphone. He funded this party, bought the house where my parents live, and has helped more people than you could imagine. Murmurs began to spread among the guests, rippling through the crowd. Melissa tried once again to interrupt by walking toward the stage, but Chloe didn't stop speaking. And today, he was called a burden, out loud, by someone in this room. The atmosphere shifted instantly, like an electric current had just passed through everyone. The expressions in the room quickly shifted from curiosity to silent shock and indignation toward the unknown aggressor. Some guests looked directly at Melissa, who struggled to keep a forced smile on her face with little success. Travis looked visibly pale, as if he knew exactly what Chloe was talking about. My granddaughter had achieved something I never thought possible, turning my humiliation into a public lesson about respect. The power dynamic was shifting right there, in front of 80 important people from Princeton, and I watched it all unfold through a glass window, like a scene from a movie. That's when Chloe said the words that would change absolutely everything forever that night. And that elegant, judgmental room was about to find out exactly who I really was. The underestimated old man they thought they knew was about to become a revelation no one expected to hear. The truth about my actual financial situation was just seconds away from being revealed publicly, and Melissa had no idea how big a problem she had created for herself, all because of one cruel sentence whispered at the completely wrong moment. And even after being treated like nothing, Chloe paused dramatically, looking straight at Melissa. My grandfather holds 8 military patents. He's a billionaire. The silence that followed was deafening, like the air had been sucked out of the entire hall. I entered quietly through the garden door as she spoke, feeling every gaze in the room shift toward me. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some guests grabbing their phones to look up information online. Melissa froze mid-step on her way to the stage, total shock written across her face. Travis dropped his fork on the plate with a clatter that echoed in the silence. The manager of the conservatory, who had been observing the situation, quickly approached me. "Mr. McAllister, is everything under control?" he asked respectfully, clearly recognizing the name from military patents. Some older guests whispered among themselves, as if connecting dots they'd never considered before. An elegant woman said loud enough to be heard, "Of course, the naval patents from MC Inc." Melissa tried to laugh nervously, but the sound came out strained and fake. "But he lives in an old house," she blurted, as if that could disprove everything. One of Melissa's own friends who worked in finance turned to her in disbelief. "You don't get it, Melissa. That's real class. Truly wealthy people don't need to show off." Other guests nodded in agreement, like a crucial puzzle piece had just clicked into place. Travis tried to stand and interrupt. "Chloe, please. This isn't necessary." But his voice was weak and lacked authority, nothing like the man who had gone along with his wife's insults. The shift in power in the room was palpable, and I could feel it as I walked toward the center. Chloe calmly handed the mic back to the DJ and walked toward me. "Grandpa, I'm sorry I had to reveal this publicly," she whispered when she reached me, "but I couldn't stand the disrespect anymore." I smiled at her and gently held her hand. The entire mood in the room had shifted. The respect I'd never received from my own family was now written on the faces of strangers. I looked directly at Melissa and Travis, who now looked like two lost kids in a department store. "Hearing what I heard today didn't hurt me," I said, with a voice steadier than I expected. I turned to the guests, who were completely silent, and focused on my words. For years, I let people think I was small, that I had no value or importance in this family. Some guests looked down, clearly embarrassed for having underestimated someone all night long. But respect isn't bought with luxury homes or fancy parties. It's built with silence, dignity, and character. Melissa tried to approach again, probably to do some damage control, but I raised my hand, signaling for quiet. And today, I found out that despite everything, I am not alone in this world. Soft but sincere applause began to rise from different parts of the room, creating a completely different atmosphere. The conservatory manager approached me again. "Mr. McAllister, it's an honor to have you here. If you need anything at all." Melissa was visibly in shock, struggling to process how the situation had slipped from her control. Travis remained silent, staring at the floor like he wished he could vanish. Some guests began to walk over to me, wanting to properly introduce themselves to the real birthday guest. The arrogant daughter-in-law who once ruled everything had become a background figure at her own party. One of the businessmen present, whom I'd seen chatting with Melissa earlier, came over to me respectfully. Mr. McAllister, I work in naval tech. Your patents from MCall Inc. revolutionized the industry back in the 90s. Other guests started to gather in a small circle around me, asking questions about my career and experiences. Melissa watched from a distance, clearly lost on how to react. It was ironic to see how the burden she wanted to disappear had become the center of genuine attention. Social power had shifted completely, and she had no idea how to handle it. Chloe stood by my side, holding my hand with a mix of pride and protection. "Want to know something else?" she asked the group around us. "My grandpa paid for the education of 3 orphaned kids, helped renovate the local library, and never once asked for recognition." The murmurs of admiration grew louder, and a few people glanced at Melissa with visible disapproval. Travis finally tried to step in. "Dad, I didn't know you." But I cut him off. "You never asked, Travis. And when I tried to talk, you'd change the subject." The shame on his face was obvious to everyone around. A local journalist covering Princeton's social events discreetly approached with a notepad. "Mr. McAllister, may I ask you a few questions about your contributions to the community?" Melissa noticed and quickly tried to step in. "That's not necessary. We're a very private family." But I smiled for the first time that night. Actually, I'd be happy to talk about the projects I support. The panic on my daughter-in-law's face was almost comical. She had spent years trying to hide me from important social circles, and now I was becoming the center of positive attention. The DJ, following Chloe's instructions, started playing a classical piece I used to listen to with my granddaughter. Several guests commented on how the musical choice was elegant and refined, a sharp contrast to the criticisms Melissa used to make. Travis made another attempt. "Dad, can we talk in private?" But I looked around, seeing faces genuinely interested in hearing my story. "No, Travis. I've spent years talking in private. That didn't go so well." Melissa looked visibly desperate, like her entire social image was collapsing right in front of her. The party had turned into something completely different from what Melissa had planned. Instead of being a shallow celebration meant to impress acquaintances, it had become a moment of truth, about character and real values. The guests were genuinely interested in speaking with me, not out of social obligation, but real curiosity. Chloe watched it all with a satisfied smile, clearly proud of standing up for her grandfather in public. "You know what's most interesting about this whole story?" I asked the group. "For years I thought I had to prove my worth to my family. Today I realized the problem was never me. The revelation about being a billionaire had completely changed the room's dynamic. People who had ignored me earlier were now approaching with genuine respect. Melissa remained isolated, watching as her own party turned against her in a way she couldn't undo. Travis kept trying to find a way to reconnect, but every attempt came off as desperate and fake. And I, for the first time in decades, felt truly valued and respected. Not just for my money, but for having the courage to show who I really was. The arrogant daughter-in-law had finally been fully exposed in front of everyone who mattered to her. Melissa made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. "Everyone, I think we've talked enough about business at a family party," she said with a forced smile, trying to disperse the group around me. But the journalist didn't budge. "Actually, Mr. McAllister, I'd really like to schedule an interview about your philanthropic work." Other guests murmured in agreement, clearly more interested in my story than in Melissa's efforts. Travis remained silent, as if he had completely lost the ability to speak. The arrogant daughter-in-law who once controlled every detail was now watching her social authority collapse. One of the most respected event planners in Princeton approached me with an admiring expression. "Mr. McAllister, I had no idea you were behind the renovation of the children's library. My daughter studies there every day." Other parents began connecting the dots. "So you were the one who funded the scholarship program?" Melissa watched each revelation with growing horror, realizing I was more respected in the community than she would ever be. I support a few institutions quietly," I replied humbly. "I never looked for recognition." Travis finally tried to join the conversation, clearly desperate to salvage the situation. "Dad, you could have told us about these projects. We could have helped." But his voice sounded hollow and far too opportunistic to be believable. One of the businessmen nearby looked at him skeptically. "Interesting, Travis. Your wife spent the whole evening talking about how your father was, what was the phrase, too simple?" The embarrassment on my son's face was obvious to everyone there. Some people began whispering to each other, connecting the dots about how I had been treated by my own family. But her defense rang even more false when one of the guests near our table said loudly, "Family jokes? I heard you say you hoped it would be his last birthday." The silence that followed was devastating for her. All eyes turned to Melissa, who visibly paled. I didn't say that. It must have been a misunderstanding," she stammered, searching for a way out. But Chloe stood her ground. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. I was there. I heard exactly what you said." Melissa's social mask was now completely falling apart in front of everyone. The conservatory manager, who had been watching the entire scene, walked over to Melissa with a serious look. "Ma'am, I believe it's best if we wrap things up now," he said diplomatically, but in a tone that left no room for argument. Some guests started saying goodbye to me with far more warmth and respect than they'd shown all evening. "It was a pleasure truly meeting you, Mr. McAllister," said an elegant woman, casting a disapproving look toward Melissa. Travis tried to approach her to calm things down, but his wife was clearly in full panic mode. Melissa made one last desperate attempt to spin the situation. "You don't understand. I organized all of this to honor Howard," but her voice was too hysterical, and no one in the room was buying it. One of her friends, who had witnessed her spiteful comments all night, shook her head in disappointment. "Melissa, stop. You're just making it worse." Other guests began gathering their purses and coats, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama. What was supposed to be the biggest social event of Melissa's career had turned into her worst professional nightmare. Travis tried a different approach, speaking directly to me in an almost pleading tone. "Dad, we can handle this at home. We don't need to involve everyone here." But I cut him off firmly. "Travis, these people are already involved. They heard how your wife talks about your father." Several guests nodded in agreement, clearly on my side of the situation. One businessman commented, "Honestly, Travis, if I treated my father like that, I'd lose the respect of all my clients." The social pressure on my son kept growing with each negative comment he received. Chloe held my hand and addressed the guests still in the hall. "Thank you for being here tonight. My grandfather deserved for you to know who he really is." Sincere applause echoed through the room, a gesture of respect I had never received from my own family. Melissa watched it all with tears of rage and humiliation in her eyes, seeing her social reputation completely crumble. Travis stood silently beside her, clearly unsure how to navigate between the wife who had caused all the trouble and the father he had neglected. The journalist approached again, completely ignoring Melissa and Travis. "Mr. McAllister, when can we talk about your foundation?" Other guests gathered around, eager to share their contacts and learn more about my philanthropic work. It was ironic to see how the very people Melissa had wanted so badly to impress were now fully focused on me. "Of course it would be my pleasure," I replied, feeling genuinely appreciated for the first time in years. Melissa tried to approach the group, but was subtly ignored by everyone present. The hall began to empty slowly, but not before several guests came to say goodbye to me personally. "Thank you for letting us meet the real guest of honor," said an elegant couple, shooting a cold glance at Melissa. Travis tried to join in the farewells, but received only formal, distant greetings, a stark contrast to the genuine warmth shown toward me. Melissa looked visibly crushed, realizing she had completely lost the respect of her social peers. The woman who had built a sophisticated image had revealed herself to be cruel and petty in front of the people who mattered most to her. When the last guests had left, only the four of us remained in the hall. Me, Chloe, Travis, and Melissa. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of the conservatory staff beginning to clean up. Melissa looked around the now empty room as if she were staring at the wreckage of her social life. Travis stayed quiet, clearly grasping the weight of what had happened that night. Chloe stood beside me, proud but also aware that she had forever changed our family dynamic. "Well," I said, breaking the silence, "I guess now everyone knows who we really are." The arrogant daughter-in-law who once controlled every detail of the party had now been completely unmasked in front of everyone who mattered to her. Travis stared at the floor, unable to look me in the eye after everything that had been exposed. Melissa tried once more to say something, but couldn't find words to undo what had happened. Chloe and I walked toward the exit, leaving them alone with the consequences of their own actions. It was time to go home and process everything that had happened on this revealing night. The silence between the two of us said everything about how much things had truly changed. The days following the party were transformative in a way I had never experienced before. The journalist published a piece about my philanthropic journey that spread throughout Princeton, and my phone wouldn't stop ringing. People I didn't even know were sending letters of gratitude for the projects I had anonymously funded over the years. Chloe spent the whole week with me, helping sort through the mail and laughing at the over-the-top reactions. "Grandpa, you've become a local celebrity," she said, holding a stack of invitations to gala dinners. For the first time in 75 years, I truly felt recognized and appreciated by the community. Travis tried calling me several times that week, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. The messages he left on my answering machine sounded desperate. "Dad, we need to talk. Dad, I didn't know any of this." But explain what exactly? Years of silence while his wife constantly disrespected me? Chloe gently offered advice. "Grandpa, maybe he really didn't realize how bad it had gotten. But I knew that Travis had made a conscious choice not to see it, because it was easier than standing up for his own father." Melissa, meanwhile, had practically vanished from Princeton's social scene. From the gossip that reached me, she had canceled several event contracts after some clients expressed discomfort. Her reputation as a refined event planner had been replaced by the image of a cruel daughter-in-law who wished her father-in-law dead. Some of her close friends had distanced themselves, while others made a point of showing they were on my side. "Karma's an interesting thing," Chloe remarked when we heard Melissa had lost the contract for the most important charity ball. 2 weeks after the party, Travis showed up at my door unannounced. He looked noticeably thinner, with deep circles under his eyes and an expression I hadn't seen since his teenage years. Genuine vulnerability. "Dad, I messed everything up," were the first words out of his mouth when I opened the door. We talked for hours in my garden, him apologizing over and over, and me trying to understand how our relationship had gotten to that point. "I was afraid of going against Melissa," he finally admitted. "And in the process, I lost my dad. In the end, we agreed to start over." Life changed completely after that night at the conservatory. Chloe and I became even closer, and she began helping me manage my philanthropic projects in a more structured way. Travis was making a real effort to reconnect, visiting regularly and showing genuine interest in my life. Melissa remained distant, and both Travis and I knew that some bridges had been burned for good. But the most important thing was that I had regained my dignity and discovered that I had never truly been alone. At 75, I finally understood that real respect doesn't come from how much money you have, but from how you treat people. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about it in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the right. Thanks for watching.